All right, so this is going to be a really quick tutorial on mass and volume. The first thing we're going to go over is mass. So what is mass? By definition, it's just the amount of matter that's in an object. Really important, the amount of matter. Before we went over what matter was, which is just anything that takes up space, well, if you have a certain amount of that, we just call that mass. So it's as simple as that. Mass is the amount of matter. In chemistry, we primarily measure mass using grams. You might hear milligrams every now and then, but for the most part, we're going to be using grams. So every time you hear grams, just think mass. Mass is different than weight. A lot of people wrote in their assessments and their pre-assessment that mass is the same thing as weight. But weight is actually dependent on gravity, meaning if I went to some other planet or some other place where there's less gravity, I will weigh less. But my amount of matter is independent of gravity. So if I go someplace that has less gravity, I'll still have the same amount of matter, which means if I have the same amount of matter, I have the same amount of mass. So mass is the amount of matter, not the weight. It is different. And it's measured using a balance. A volume, is the amount of space that an object takes up. So it's different than mass because mass is the amount of matter, but how much that matter, how much space it takes up is what's called volume. This is different than the volume that you hear, on your iPod or your car where you crank the volume up for your music and so it's nice and loud. This is actually different than that. This is just the amount of space that an object takes up. In chemistry, it's measured primarily with milliliters, so you're going to hear that a lot in this class. If you ever hear milliliters, just think volume. You might also hear liters every now and then, but for the most part, we're going to be in milliliters or mLs. It is different than mass, like we just said, and it's measured using a graduated cylinder. So this is as opposed to mass, which is measured using a balance. So that's a brief overview of the difference between mass and volume. If you have any questions, let me know.